Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
Exactly 1 year ago to the day, I saw The Last Jedi for the very first time. I was able to get an advanced screening with some fan event where you get to see it early and get to see some bonus footage. I watched the movie with my best friend, and he wasn't all that excited to see it. I was more scared than anything, and then the movie started. And I'm sure you can guess that I'm not the biggest fan of this film. I would go so far to say that I hate this film. But then again, I have only seen it maybe 3 times, and once was already enough for me. When we look back at the films that split their fan base, this is one of the clearest examples in modern times. Leading up to the film, many people didn't think it would be bad. I remember being one of the few people nervous about this film, and nervous that it would suck. When the runtime was leaked to be 2.5 hours, I was the first to say this is bad news, since the other longest Star Wars film was Attack of the Clones, and I'd argue that's a pretty bad film itself. I also wasn't a fan on how Luke acted in the trailers. What do you mean the Jedi must end? That didn't sound like Luke at all. My biggest problem with the film has always been its handling of the characters. This has caused widespread debate among Star Wars fans, but Star Wars fans also need to share some of the blame with this movie being so disappointing. You see, there's a few major complaints by people on The Last Jedi. My biggest complaint is about Luke Skywalker, but I've covered that topic countless times on this channel. But another biggest complaint is that The Force Awakens intentionally made us ask questions that seemed to need answering. The most obvious question was, who are Rey's parents? The Force Awakens made us ask this question. Rey's entire arc seemed to be around her parents. Why did they leave her? Who are they? How is she so good at everything she does? These are some pretty basic questions that were intentionally made in The Force Awakens, so we as an audience can expect some answers in the later trilogy. The other question was, who is this Snoke guy? Who is Snoke was such a popular question it became a meme in the fandom. Every Star Wars channel was making theories on who this guy is. Is he Darth Plagueis? Mace Windu? That kid that Anakin killed? Is Snoke Palpatine? Is he Jar Jar? Who the hell knows now? Rian Johnson didn't want to answer this question. He instead kills off Snoke, providing no explanation on who he was as a character. Rian Johnson even teases fans with this picture about the whole Snoke theory. People who defend The Last Jedi use the most foolish arguments on why we don't need to know who Snoke is. They say we don't need a backstory on Palpatine in the original trilogy. He showed up like Snoke and we never heard his backstory until George Lucas made the prequels. This is by far one of the dumbest defenses for The Last Jedi. When the original trilogy came out, there was no backstory of Star Wars. The new movies were all we had. So when George Lucas tells us that Palpatine is an evil guy, we don't need the backstory to him, because we don't know what Star Wars was like during the prequel era. Snoke, however, comes in 30 years after Palpatine. Now, I'm no expert of telling the age of someone from their face, but I would make a strong bet that Snoke is over the age of 30, which begs the questions, why did we never hear about him until The Force Awakens? Would Palpatine and Vader allow a dark side user like Snoke run around? Or vice versa? This is why we want to know who he is, because he quite literally came out of nowhere. I will admit that Star Wars fans need to take some responsibility for this one too. Countless channels clickbaited people into believing their Snoke theories. People would claim they had official leaks and that they really knew who Snoke was. This in turn made many fans go in with expectations that we would learn who Snoke was. For 2 years we speculated on who he was, just so he could die with his tongue out. Maybe he is Jar Jar. I personally hated every Snoke theory. The only one I would be content with was if he was Darth Plagueis, but I really wanted an original character. I'm not as mad as everyone else is, and their stupid theories weren't accurate. However, it's pretty stupid that this guy rose to power after the Emperor, and we have no explanation on why, how, and who this guy is. With the context of the entire Star Wars Skywalker saga, this character Snoke makes absolutely no sense. Rey is also a big debate as well. I never wanted her to be related to anybody. The idea that Star Wars had to revolve around one family annoys me. The Force shouldn't be some inherited ability that you can only get from your heritage. The prequels perfectly show that almost anybody could have the Force. The Jedi here aren't related to the Skywalker family at all. Even Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back shows that Luke expected a great warrior. Instead, he got a little green guy who talks funny. This shows that the Force can be powerful in even the most unlikely creatures. Sadly, J.J. Abrams wanted Rey's arc to be about her heritage. Rian Johnson wanted to make a very smart decision and show the audience that anyone could use the Force. You don't have to be related to anybody in order to use the Force. I agree with Rian on this. I love what Rian was going for here. However, due to the lack of planning by JJ and Rian, they had different ideas for Rey. If The Force Awakens didn't spend the entire time asking who Rey's parents were, then nobody would care that they're nobody. The reason we don't care who Han Solo's parents are in A New Hope is because it was never a question we needed answered. Han's character isn't defined by his family, and neither should Rey. Sadly though, Rey's arc in The Force Awakens is based on who her parents are, and Rian Johnson saw this and wanted to surprise the audience. That seems to be the biggest problem with this movie, is Rian Johnson constantly trying to surprise us with his actions in this movie, or as he calls it, subverting expectations. The problem with this movie is that the goal was to give you a story you weren't expecting. As an audience, we as Star Wars fans go in with a certain checklist. The common checklist for this movie goes as follows. The movie needs to tell me who Snoke is. Rey's parents need to be revealed. Luke Skywalker needs to be a badass. There needs to be a lightsaber fight. Rian Johnson must have gotten his hands on one of the fans' checklists for the film, and decided that it'd be really crazy to do the complete opposite. Rey's a nobody, her parents are nobodies, Snoke simply dies with no backstory, Luke isn't the badass that everyone wanted him to be, and there is no lightsaber battle. My question to Rian Johnson is this: did you really think the Star Wars fanbase would be okay with you completely doing the opposite of what they expected? Ryan's biggest problem with the fandom is over the character of Luke Skywalker. If you don't want to hear about this problem, I recommend skipping this part. Luke in The Last Jedi completely contradicts almost everything he stood for in the original trilogy, and the fact that people defend his character and his actions in this movie is the most shocking thing. In The Last Jedi, Luke has turned his back on the Jedi Order and refuses to help those who need him. Ryan knew the audience expected Luke to come back and take on the First Order. Ironically, this is exactly what happened. Besides that, Luke makes no sense in this movie. The first problem is Luke abandoning those who need him. In the original trilogy, Luke is a pretty nice guy. He could have left C-3PO when he was destroyed, but he didn't. In fact, Luke is one of the few characters to show respect to the droids. Han notoriously treats C-3PO like crap, while Luke treats him like a friend. When they asked Luke if he wanted to damage R2-D2 to fly with him on the Death Star attack, Luke doesn't see R2-D2 as a random droid like the others, and he actually in fact declares that he should keep the droid. When Ben asks Luke for help, Luke seems reluctant, but he still offers to take him as far as Mos Eisley. Then when Luke discovers that his aunt and uncle have been murdered and burned along with his home, instead of crying and giving up, he immediately goes to Ben and starts an adventure to become a Jedi. Compare this young Luke Skywalker to Luke Skywalker in this situation right here, after his temple is burned down and he lost his entire Jedi Order. He completely gives up on everything. Ironically, the Jedi Order failing is his own damn fault. This is the biggest problem with the movie. Ben Solo is a young Jedi in training. Luke is Ben's uncle and his Jedi Master. One night, Luke went to Ben's bed and sensed the darkness in him, and therefore Luke turned on his lightsaber. Now, any person who can think logically would say it's pretty clear that Luke is about to kill Ben Solo. Some people use Luke's quote that it passed like a shadow as defense to his actions. My counter to this is two simple things. First of all, if you go into a family member's room at night and you stand over their bed with a gun in your hand, it would clearly imply that you were trying to kill them. And telling the judge your honor passed like a fleeting shadow isn't going to hold up in the court of law. Also, Luke is about to attack Ben, which contradicts the lessons that Luke learned from Yoda.
A Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack.
Luke is a guy who would risk his own life to save his father. Now remember, Luke saw his home and his family burned down. Vader killed Luke's mentor, Ben Kenobi. Luke lost his hand to Vader, and that was after Vader had lured Luke to Bespin by capturing his friends and torturing Han. Besides all of that, and the evil that is Darth Vader, arguably one of the most evil men of all time, Luke still tried to redeem his father, to the point where he went to confront the Emperor in order to save his father. So how does a guy go from refusing to kill his own father, arguably the most evil man in the galaxy, to trying to kill his nephew in his sleep because he sensed some darkness in him? Luke from the original trilogy would try to save his nephew and influence him to make the right decisions. Hell, even Rey gave Kylo a chance to show that he was good. But Luke won't? When Anakin turned to the dark side, Padme and Obi-Wan still tried to convince him to turn back, even after he killed the entire Jedi Order and slaughtered a bunch of younglings. Now, some people would argue that Luke was trying to prevent Kylo from destroying the world, and in order to do that, he had to kill him at a young age. If that was the case, however, why wouldn't Yoda do the same thing to Anakin when he was young? He sensed a lot of problems going on with Anakin, a lot of fear. He even warned Obi-Wan that he sensed grave dangers in Anakin's training. I don't see the Jedi Council sneaking into Anakin's room at night, pulling out a lightsaber, and basically attempting to kill him. They at least gave him the chance to train, and while yes, Anakin did destroy the Jedi Order, you would think Luke would learn from his predecessors' mistakes instead of drastically doing worse than they did. But all that aside, The Last Jedi really makes me concerned for the future of the Star Wars franchise. Reason being is, Kathleen Kennedy let a guy like Rian Johnson, a relatively unknown director, take charge of this film. They let this guy write and direct it. The prequel trilogy perfectly shows that one guy in charge of everything, and no one to offer any different creative input other than George Lucas, you're gonna get Star Wars films that upset a lot of fans.
Jar Jar is a key to all this.
The original trilogy shows that with a team that can collaborate and everyone helps and makes a creative film as unique as possible, you can get one of the greatest trilogies of all time. Don't forget that Kathleen Kennedy and the people at Disney and Lucasfilm liked what Rian Johnson did so much with The Last Jedi that they were planning on giving him a brand new trilogy. That's right, the guy who made the film that truly split the fandom got nothing but full support from the people in charge of Star Wars. And that's the scariest part of this movie.